Even like this, you still want me? She asked. The human didn't hesitate. Broken wings crash lit up Thalos's amber sky, like a falling star, except the star screamed as it died. Joran Kane looked up from his evening meal, watching the streak of fire arc across the horizon before disappearing behind the crystalline ridges that bordered his research station. The impact tremor reached him seconds later, rattling his coffee mug against the metal table. In the 3 years he'd been stationed on this forgotten mining world, he'd seen plenty of debris fall from space, old satellites, cargo containers, the occasional meteorite. But this felt different. This felt like someone was in trouble. He grabbed his emergency kit and the portable scanner, then fired up his rover. The crash site wasn't far, maybe 20 kilometers through the maze of abandoned mining tunnels that honeycombed the planet's surface. As he drove, Joran couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had fallen wasn't going to be another piece of space junk. The wreckage was worse than he'd expected. What had once been a sleek fighter craft now lay scattered across a small crater, its hull split open like broken eggshell. The design was unfamiliar, definitely not human construction. The metal had an organic quality to it, as if it had been grown rather than built. Strange symbols glowed faintly along what remained of the fuselage before flickering out entirely. That's when he heard the sound, a low moan coming from the largest piece of debris. Joran grabbed his kit and scrambled down into the crater. The cockpit section had somehow remained partially intact, though the canopy was shattered. Inside, he could make out a figure slumped against the controls. At first glance, the pilot looked human enough, until he got closer. Her skin had a subtle luminescence to it, like moonlight on water, and was marked with intricate patterns that seemed to shift in the light. Her hair, though matted with blood, held hints of silver that caught the dying sunlight. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, but she was also dying. "Hey," Joran called softly, not wanting to startle her if she was conscious. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes snapped open, large, expressive eyes the color of deep space, flecked with gold. For a moment, they stared at each other across a gulf of species and circumstance. Then she spoke, her voice rough but unmistakably hostile. "Stay back, human." The word human came out like a curse, but Joran had dealt with enough injured people to recognize pain-driven anger when he heard it. Blood seeped from a gash along her temple, and her left arm hung at an unnatural angle. "You're hurt," he said, keeping his voice calm. "I'm going to help you. I don't need help from your kind." She tried to move and immediately gasped in pain, especially not from someone too weak to survive real combat. Joran ignored the insult and began scanning her injuries with his medical device. 3 broken ribs, a fractured arm, possible internal bleeding, and more cuts than he could count. Without treatment, she'd be dead within hours. "Look, I don't know what your people taught you about humans, but right now, I'm the only chance you've got," he said, already calculating what supplies he'd need from his station. "My name's Joran. What's yours?" She glared at him for a long moment, pride warring with desperation in those starlit eyes. Finally, she whispered, "Kestra." "Okay, Kestra, let's get you somewhere safe." As he carefully extracted her from the wreckage, Joran couldn't help but wonder what kind of war could drive someone to crash alone on a planet at the edge of nowhere. What he did know was that she was hurt. She was alone, and despite her hostility, she was now his responsibility. The journey back to his station would be the first of many steps in a dance. Neither of them expected to learn. Walls of Iskestra woke to the unfamiliar sensation of softness beneath her body. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The last clear memory was her ship spinning out of control, the taste of blood in her mouth as she fought to keep consciousness. Then the events came flooding back. The crash, the human who'd found her, his gentle hands pulling her from the wreckage. She was lying on what appeared to be a medical bed in a sterile white room. Clean bandages wrapped her torso, and her arm was secured in a stabilizing brace. Someone had cleaned the blood from her face and hair. The realization that she'd been unconscious and vulnerable in the presence of a human made her stomach clench with shame. "You're awake," the voice came from the doorway, and she turned to see Joran entering with a tray of food. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he'd been awake caring for her. "How long?" she asked, hating how weak her voice sounded. 2 days. You were pretty banged up. He set the tray on a side table and checked the monitors. Beside her bed, internal bleeding stopped. Ribs are mending. You heal faster than humans do. Kestra tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain shot through her side. Joran moved to help her, but she flinched away from his touch. Don't, she snapped. I can manage. Right. He stepped back, hands raised. There's food if you want it. Nutrient paste, mostly, but I added some protein from the rations. She looked at the tray with suspicion. Among her people, accepting food from an enemy was considered a sign of weakness. But among her people, she was also supposed to be dead by now, either from honorable combat or ritual suicide. Rather than capture, the old rules seemed meaningless. Here, why are you helping me? She asked instead of reaching for the food. Joran pulled up a chair beside the bed, careful to keep his distance. Because you needed help. That's not an answer. Humans don't do anything without ulterior motives. Maybe the humans you knew were different from me. Kestra laughed bitterly. The humans I knew were the ones who sold weapons to both sides of our civil war, the ones who promised aid, and then watched as my people tore each other apart, the ones who carved up our territories while we bled. Joran was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry that happened to your people, are you? Or are you just saying what you think I want to hear? I'm saying it because it's true. He met her eyes, steadily. What happened to the Nexari was wrong. But I wasn't part of that. I'm just an engineer who came out here to study crystal formations, and ended up running a one-man medical station for anyone who needs it. How noble of you. The sarcasm in her voice was thick enough to cut. Look, I get it. You don't trust me. You probably have good reasons not to trust any human. But right now, I'm all you've got. He stood up, moving toward the door. The food's there if you want it. Try to get some rest. After he left, Kestra stared at the ceiling, fighting the war between her pride and her pragmatism. She was stranded on an alien world with no way home, no resources, and no allies. Her ship was destroyed, her mission failed, and everyone she'd ever cared about was likely dead. The smart thing would be to accept help from the only person offering it. But accepting help meant admitting weakness. It meant acknowledging that she needed someone else, needed a human, to survive. The smell of the food finally overcame her reservations. She ate slowly, hating how good it tasted after days of unconsciousness. Each bite felt like another small surrender. Joran returned later with medical supplies, his manner professional and distant. Need to change your bandages, he said. I can do it myself, with one working arm, right? He approached cautiously, like she was a wild animal that might bolt. I'm not going to hurt you. Kestra, I'm trying to help you heal. Something in his tone made her stop fighting. She sat still as he carefully unwrapped the bandages around her ribs. His touch gentle but impersonal. The wounds were healing well, but she could see the concern in his eyes as he examined them. These weren't from the crash, he said quietly, tracing a scar that ran along her collarbone. This is older, from a blade. Kestra's jaw tightened. Battle scar. This one too? He indicated another mark on her shoulder. All of them. She pulled away from his touch. My people are warriors. We earn our scars. Must have been a hard way to live. It was the only way to live. She watched him work, noting how his hands remained steady despite her hostility. Why aren't you afraid of me? Joran paused in his bandaging. Should I be? I could kill you. Even injured, I'm trained in 17 different combat techniques. I'm sure you are. He resumed his work. But you haven't. That tells me something about who you really are. You know nothing about who I am. Maybe not. But I know you're not the monster you're trying to convince me you are. Kestra felt something crack inside her chest, not her ribs, but something deeper. You're a fool, probably. Joran finished with the bandages and stepped back. But I'm a fool who's keeping you alive, so maybe that counts for something. As he left her alone again, Kestra found herself staring at the door long after he'd gone. She'd been trained to see humans as weak, as inferior beings who relied on technology and numbers instead of personal strength. But Joran's quiet confidence, his steady hands, his refusal to be intimidated by her threats, none of it fit the profile she'd been taught. For the first time since the crash, she wondered if everything she'd believed about humans might be wrong. Cracks in the armor of storm hit Thalos 3 days later with the fury of an angry god. Kestra had been sitting by the window in what Jorn called the common area, watching the amber sky darken to deep bronze. She was stronger now, able to walk short distances without assistance, though her ribs still protested with each breath. The view from the station was stark, but beautiful, endless crystalline formations that caught and refracted the light into rainbow patterns across the landscape. "We need to move to the inner chambers," Jorn said, checking his weather instruments with growing concern. "This one's going to be bad." "How bad?" "The kind that can strip the coating off the station's hull. Temperature drops to -40. Winds over to 100 kilometers per hour. We'll be lucky if the power grid survives." As if summoned by his words, the first gust of wind rattled the station's walls. Within minutes, the storm was howling around them like something alive and hungry. Jorn led her through a series of corridors to a smaller chamber deep in the station's heart, a combination storage room and emergency shelter with its own power source and life support. "It's cramped, but it's safe," he said, sealing the door. Behind them, "We might be here for a while." The room was indeed small, barely large enough for the people to move around comfortably. Emergency supplies lined the walls, and there was a single bunk bed along one side. The storm's roar was muffled here, but they could still feel the station shudder with each powerful gust. "You take the bed," Jorn said, pulling out a sleeping mat. "I'll make do on the floor." "No." The word came out sharper than Kestra intended. At his questioning look, she softened her tone. "Among my people, the injured don't take comfort while their caretakers suffer. It's a matter of honor. Your honor and my back pain aren't really comparable," he said with a slight smile. "They are to me." Something in her voice made him look at her more closely. "Okay, we'll share. It's big enough for two, barely." The arrangement was awkward at first. They lay stiffly on opposite sides of the narrow bed, the space between them charged with tension. Kestra was acutely aware of his presence, the warmth radiating from his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way he held himself carefully still to avoid touching her. "Tell me about your people," he said quietly into the darkness. "Before the war." Kestra was silent for so long he thought she might have fallen asleep. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost wondering. "We were explorers once, artists. The Nexari built cities that sang in harmony with the wind, created sculptures from living light. Our ships were works of art as much as transportation. What changed? Resources became scarce on our homeworld. Different factions formed, each believing they had the right solution. The war was supposed to be brief, a way to settle the debate and move forward united." She laughed bitterly. "It lasted 60 years. By the end, there was nothing left to fight for." Jorn turned slightly toward her. "Is that why you were flying alone? No wingman? No support?" "I was the last of my squadron, the last of my clan, probably." The admission seemed to cost her something. The mission was supposed to be reconnaissance, but it was really just giving me something to do besides wait to die. "I'm sorry." "Stop saying that." But there was no heat in her voice. "Your sympathy won't bring them back." "No, but it's all I have to offer." They fell silent again, listening to the storm rage outside their small sanctuary. After a while, Kestra became aware that she was shivering despite the room's warmth. The tremors weren't from cold, they were from the memories, from the weight of loss she'd been carrying for so long. "Hey," Jorn said softly, noticing her distress. "It's okay. It's not okay." The words came out cracked, broken. "Nothing is okay. My people are gone. My world is ash. And I'm lying here accepting charity from someone I was taught to despise. Maybe what you were taught was wrong. Maybe it was." She turned to face him in the darkness, and suddenly they were very close, close enough that she could see the flecks of green in his brown eyes, close enough to feel his breath on her face. "Why do you care what happens to me?" "Because you're here, because you're hurt, because everyone deserves someone to care about them. Even a broken warrior with nothing left to offer, especially her." The space between them seemed to shrink without either of them moving. Kestra found herself studying his face, the strong jaw, the kind eyes, the mouth that spoke gentle words when she expected cruelty. When had he stopped being just a human and become Joran? I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Do what? Trust. Accept help. Feel. She struggled for the words. Feel anything other than anger or emptiness. You don't have to know how. You just have to be willing to try. Her hand found his in the space between them, fingers intertwining tentatively. His skin was warm, callous from work, completely human, and somehow that didn't matter anymore. I killed people, she said quietly, in the war. Good people who were just fighting for what they believed in, like I was. That doesn't make you a monster, it makes you a survivor. How can you be so sure? Because monsters don't lie awake feeling guilty about what they've done. Monsters don't risk their lives on pointless reconnaissance missions. Because they can't bear to be idle while their people suffer. Monsters don't hesitate to accept help. Because they're worried about maintaining their honor. Tears she hadn't shed in years began to track down her cheeks. Joran reached out gently, thumb brushing them away with infinite care. The touch was electric, sending warmth through her entire body. I'm scared, she admitted in a voice barely above a whisper. Of me, of this, of wanting something again, when I've lost everything I ever cared about. Maybe that's what makes it worth wanting. The storm continued to rage outside, but in their small shelter, something new was being born. When Kestra leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, it was tentative, questioning. When he kissed her back, it was with a gentleness that spoke of patience and promise rather than demand. They held each other as the storm passed, two lonely souls finding warmth in the darkness, discovering that sometimes the most beautiful things could grow in the most unlikely places. The question 3 weeks after the storm. Kestra was strong enough to help with the station's daily operations. She'd learned to calibrate the crystal scanners, assist with equipment maintenance, and even cook the protein rations into something almost palatable. The routine gave her purpose, something she hadn't felt since before the war's end. But as her body healed, another kind of pain grew stronger. She was falling in love with Joran, had probably been falling since that first night in the shelter, and it terrified her more than any battle she'd ever fought. Your ship's beacon is still transmitting, Joran said one evening as they reviewed the day's scanner readings, faintly, but it's there. If any of your people are still out there looking for survivors, they're not. Kestra's voice was flat, final. Even if some Nexari still live, they wouldn't come for one broken pilot. We don't leave resources on lost causes. You're not a lost cause. She looked at him across the small table, heart clenching, at the certainty in his voice. Aren't I? I have no ship, no home, no people. What am I now except a burden you're too kind to abandon? You're someone who makes my coffee taste better because you're there to share it with. Someone who figured out how to repair the atmospheric recycler when I'd been fighting with it for months. Someone who listens to my terrible jokes and actually laughs sometimes. Joran. She stood up, suddenly needing distance. You don't understand. I wasn't just a pilot. I was a weapon. My hands have killed more people than you've probably ever met. I've destroyed cities, burned worlds. How can you look at me and see anything worth saving? He stood too, moving closer despite her retreat. Because that's not all you are. You're also the woman who spends her evenings trying to decode the crystal formations. Because you think they're beautiful. Who saved half your rations for me when you thought I wasn't eating enough. Who cries in your sleep sometimes and tries to hide it because you think grief makes you weak. Tears burned in her eyes. I am weak. I should have died with honor alongside my people instead of crawling away to hide on this empty world. There's no honor in throwing your life away. There's only waste. Then what is there for me? What kind of future can someone like me have? Joran reached for her hands, holding them gently despite the tremor in her fingers. Whatever kind you wanted to build. With you. The question slipped out before she could stop it. Raw and desperate. Even knowing what I am, what I've done, even seeing me like this, broken, scarred, with nothing to offer but a past full of violence. The silence stretched between them, and Kestra felt her heart breaking. Of course he couldn't want her. She was damaged goods, a relic of a dead civilization, with blood on her hands and nightmares in her sleep. What could she possibly give him except pain? Kestra, he said finally, his voice soft but unwavering. I don't want the warrior everyone feared. I don't want the perfect soldier or the unstoppable pilot. I want the woman who survived it all. I want the person who sits with me in the mornings, watching the sunrise and tells me stories about cities that sang. I want the woman who's learning to smile again, who's teaching me that strength isn't about never falling down, it's about getting back up. She stared at him through her tears, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. I want you, Kestra, not despite your scars, but including them, not despite your past, but because it made you who you are. I want the chance to build something new with you. If you'll let me, I don't know how to be anything other than a soldier. Then, let's figure it out together. When he kissed her this time, it was different, deeper, more certain. She kissed him back with all the desperate hope she'd been afraid to feel, letting herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have this one beautiful thing. They made love that night with a tenderness that spoke of healing and promise. In Joran's arms, Kestra discovered that her body could be something other than a weapon. It could be a source of pleasure and connection, a way to express the love she'd thought she'd lost the capacity to feel. I love you, she whispered against his chest as they lay together afterward. I love you too, he replied, fingers tracing gentle patterns on her skin. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. 6 months later, the research station on Thalos had been transformed into something resembling a home. Kestra had helped Joran expand the living quarters, add a proper kitchen, and create a small garden using the planet's unique crystal-enriched soil. The vegetables they grew were strange colors, but surprisingly delicious. The morning readings are looking good, Kestra said, reviewing the scanner data over breakfast. The new crystal formation in Sector 7 is definitely growing. Your research notes are going to revolutionize mining techniques across the galaxy. Our research notes, Joran corrected, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. You're as much a part of this discovery as I am, she smiled, still marveling at how natural it felt to wake up beside him each morning, to share the quiet moments between sleep and duty. The nightmares came less frequently now, and when they did, Joran was there to hold her until the memories faded. I've been thinking, she said, suddenly nervous, about the future, about what we're building here. What about it? I want to send a message, not to look for survivors from my people. I've accepted that part of my life is over, but to let other refugees know there's a safe place here, others who've lost everything and need somewhere to start again. Joran's face lit up. A sanctuary, a home for the lost, she agreed. We have room, resources, and she gestured between them, proof that different species can build something beautiful together. The Nexari weren't the only ones who suffered. In the wars, there are probably hundreds of species with refugees scattered across the galaxy. Exactly. Kestra stood up, pacing with excitement. We could help them find each other, give them a place to heal and rebuild, turn this empty world into something alive again. Joran caught her hand as she passed, pulling her down to sit on his lap. You realize this means we'd be committing to staying here permanently, making this our life. Is that what you want? She asked, suddenly uncertain. With you, I can't think of anything I want more. They spent the morning composing their first message to broadcast across the refugee networks. By evening, they'd received 3 responses from displaced families looking for a safe haven. As the sun set over the crystal formations, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, Kestra stood on the station's observation deck with Joran's arms around her waist. The landscape that had once seemed barren and empty now looked full of potential. No regrets? He asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. None, she said, leaning back against his chest. I lost everything I thought I was, but I found something better. What's that? I found out who I could become. Below them, the crystals caught the last light of day and threw it back in brilliant rainbows, a promise of beauty born from the planet's ancient violence, just like the love they'd built from the ashes of war. 3 years later, the Thalos sanctuary housed 47 refugees from 12 different species. Children played in the crystal gardens while their parents worked together to build new homes and new lives. The mining station had become a small town, and the town was becoming a community. Kestra stood in the doorway of the school she'd helped build, watching Joran teach a group of mixed-species children about the planet's unique geology. When he caught her eye and smiled, she felt the same warmth she'd experienced that first night in the storm shelter. The recognition of home found in another person's heart. She was no longer a warrior of a dead empire. She was a teacher, a leader, a protector of the lost and broken. She was Joran's partner in building something that would outlast them both. She was exactly who she was meant to be. The end.